Random House Audible presents selected stories from McSweeney's Mammoth Treasury of Thrilling Tales. Edited by Michael Chabon. All new, never-before-heard original stories by Stephen King, Michael Crichton, Elmore Leonard, Nick Hornby, Dave Eggers, and more. Read for you by Kevin Gray. How Carlos Webster Changed His Name to Carl and Became a Famous Oklahoma Lawman by Elmore Leonard. The fate of a bank-robbing murderer resided in 2 scoops of peach ice cream on top of a sugar cone. Carlos Webster was 15 years old the time he witnessed the robbery and murder at Deering's drugstore. It was in the summer of 1921. He told Bud Maddox, the Okmulgee chief of police, he had driven a load of cows up to the yard at Tulsa, and by the time he got back it was dark. He said he left the stock trailer across the street from Deering's and went inside to get an ice cream cone. When he identified one of the robbers as Frank Miller, Bud Maddox said, "Son, Frank Miller robs banks. He don't bother with drugstores no more." Carlos had been raised on hard work and respect for his elders. He said, "I could be wrong," knowing he wasn't. They brought him over to police headquarters in the courthouse to look at photos. He pointed to Frank Miller staring at him from a $500 wanted bulletin and picked the other one, Jim Ray Monk's, from mugshots. Bud Maddox said, "You're positive, huh?" and asked Carlos which one was it shot the Indian, meaning Junior Harjo with the tribal police, who'd walked in not knowing the store was being robbed. "Was Frank Miller shot him," Carlos said, "with a .45 Colt." "You sure it was a Colt?" "Navy issue like my dad's." "I'm teasing," Bud Maddox said. He and Carlos's dad, Virgil Webster, were buddies, both having fought in the Spanish-American War, and for a number of years were the local heroes. But now doughboys were back from France telling about the Great War over there. "If you like to know what I think happened," Carlos said, "Frank Miller only came in for a pack of smokes." Bud Maddox stopped him. "Tell it from the time you got there." "Okay, well, the reason was to get an ice cream cone. Mr. Deering was in back, doing prescriptions. He looked out of that little window and told me to help myself. So I went over to the soda fountain and scooped up a double dip of peach on a sugar cone and went up to the cigar counter and left a nickel by the cash register. That's where I was when I see these 2 men come in wearing suits and hats I thought at first were salesmen. Mr. Deering calls to me to wait on them as I know the store pretty well. Frank Miller comes up to the counter. You knew right away who he was?" "Once he was close, yes, sir. From pictures of him in the paper. He said to give him a deck of Luckies." I did, and he picks up the nickel I'd left by the register, hands it to me and says, "This ought to cover it." "You tell him it was yours?" "No, sir." "Or a pack of Luckies was 15 cents? I didn't argue with him. But see, I think that's when he got the idea of robbing the store. The cash register's sitting there, nobody around but me holding my ice cream cone. Mr. Deering never came out from the back. The other one, Jim Ray Monk's, he wanted a tube of Ungentine, he said, for a heat rash was bothering him under his arms. I got it for him, and he didn't pay either. Then Frank Miller says, "Let's see what you have in the register." I told him I didn't know how to open it as I didn't work there. He leans over the counter and points to a key, a man who knows his cash registers, and says, "That one right there. Hit it and she'll open for you." I press the key. Mr. Deering must have heard it ring open. He calls from the back of the store, "Carlos, you able to help them out?" Frank Miller raised his voice, saying, "Carlos is doing fine," using my name. He told me then to take out the scrip but leave the change. "How much did he get?" "No more than $50, Carlos said. He took his time thinking about what happened right after, starting with Frank Miller looking at his ice cream cone. Carlos saw it as personal, something between him and Frank Miller, so he skipped over it, telling Bud Maddox, "I put the money on the counter for him, mostly singles." I look up. Junior Harjo walks in, Bud Maddox said. "A robbery in progress." "Yes, sir. But Junior doesn't know it. Frank Miller's at the counter with his back to him. Jim Ray Monk's is over at the soda fountain getting into the ice cream. Neither of them had their guns out, so I doubt Junior saw it as a robbery. But Mr. Deering sees Junior and calls out he's got his mother's medicine. Then says for all of us to hear, "She tells me they got you raiding stills looking for moonshine." He said something about setting a jar aside for him, and that's all I heard. Now the guns are coming out. Frank Miller's Colt from inside his suit. I guess all he had to see was Junior's badge and his sidearm. That was enough. Frank Miller shot him. He'd know with that Colt 1 round would do the job, but he stepped up and shot Junior again, lying on the floor. There was silence. "I'm trying to recall," Bud Maddox said. "How many Frank Miller's killed?" "I believe 6. Half of them police officers."
7, Carlos said. "You count the bank hostage had to stand on his running board. Fell off and broke her neck?"
"I just read the report on that one," Bud Maddox said. "Was a Dodge Touring. Same as Blackjack Pershing's staff car over in France."
"They drove away from the drugstore in LaSalle," Carlos said, and gave Bud Maddox the license number.
Here was the part Carlos saw as personal and had skipped over, beginning with Frank Miller looking at his ice cream cone, then asking,
"What is that, peach?"
Carlos said it was, and Frank Miller reached out his hand, saying,
"Let me have a bite there,"
and took the cone to hold it away from him as it was starting to drip. He bent over to lick it a couple times before putting his mouth around a big bite he took from the top dip.
He said, "That's good,"
with a trace of peach ice cream along the edge of his mustache. Frank Miller stared at Carlos then like he was studying his features and began licking the cone again. He said,
"Carlos, huh?" cocking his head to one side. "You got the dark hair, but you don't look like any Carlos to me. What's your other name?"
"Carlos Huntington Webster, that's all of them."
"It's a lot of name for a boy,"
Frank Miller said.
"So you're part greaser on your mama's side, huh? What's she, Mex?"
Carlos hesitated before saying,
"Cuban. I was named for her dad."
"Cuban's the same as Mex," Frank Miller said. "You got greaser blood in you, boy, even if it don't show much. You come off lucky there." He licked the cone again, holding it with the tips of his fingers, the little fingers sticking out in a dainty kind of way. Carlos, 15 years old but as tall as this man with the ice cream on his mustache, wanted to call him a dirty name and hit him in the mouth as hard as he could, then go over the counter and bulldog him to the floor the way he'd put a bull calf down to brand and cut off its balls. 15 years old, but he wasn't stupid. He held on while his heart beat against his chest. He felt the need to stand up to this man, saying finally, "My dad was on the battleship Maine when she was blown up in Havana Harbor, February 15th, 1898. He survived and fought the Dons with Huntington's Marines in that war in Cuba, and met my mother, Grazia Plena. When the war was over, he went back and brought her to Oklahoma when it was still Indian territory. She died having me, so I never knew her. I never met my dad's mother, either. She's part Northern Cheyenne, lives on a reservation out at Lame Deer, Montana," saying it in a voice that was slow and calm compared to what he felt inside. Saying, "What I want to ask you, if having Indian blood, too, makes me something else besides a greaser." Saying it in Frank Miller's face, causing this man with ice cream on his mustache to squint at him.
"For one thing," Frank Miller said, "the Indian blood makes you and your daddy breeds, him more'n you."
He kept staring at Carlos as he raised the cone, his little fingers sticking out, Carlos thinking to lick it again, but what he did was toss the cone over his shoulder, not looking or caring where it would land. It hit the floor in front of Junior Harjo just then walking in, badge on his tan shirt, revolver on his hip, and Carlos saw the situation turning around. He felt the excitement of these moments, but with some relief, too. It picked him up and gave him the nerve to say to Frank Miller, "Now you're going to have to clean up your mess." Except Junior wasn't pulling his .38. He was looking at the ice cream on the linoleum, and Mr. Deering was calling to him about his mother's medicine and about raiding stills, and Frank Miller was turning from the counter with the Colt in his hand, firing, shooting Junior Harjo and stepping closer to shoot him again. There was no sign of Mr. Deering. Jim Ray Monks came over to have a look at Junior. Frank Miller laid his Colt on the glass counter, picked up the cash in both hands, and shoved the bills into his coat pockets before looking at Carlos again.
"You said something to me. Geronimo come in and you said something sounded smart, Alec."
Carlos said, "What'd you kill him for?" Still looking at Junior on the floor.
"I want to know what you said to me."
Frank Miller waited. Carlos looked up, rubbing the back of his hand across his mouth. "I said now you'll have to clean up your mess. The ice cream on the floor."
"That's all?" "It's what I said."
Frank Miller kept looking at him.
"You had a gun, you'd have shot me, huh? Calling you a greaser. Hell, it's a law of nature. You got any of that blood in you, you're a greaser. I can't help it, it's how it is. Being a breed on top of it. I don't know if that's called anything or not. But you could pass if you want, you look enough white. Hell, call yourself Carl, I won't tell on you."
Carlos and his dad lived in a big new house Virgil said was a California bungalow, off the road and into the pecan trees, a house that was all porch across the front and windows in the steep slant
Sample complete. Ready to continue?